I, Dylan Tillman, was raised by my grandfather for most of my life. I was only a 10-year-old boy when my mother abandoned me, and since then, I was somehow always in trouble. I would get into fights at the drop of a hat and with everyone, left and right. Soon I got too problematic and got myself placed in juvenile hall. I spent around 3 years in there, and those 3 years were some of my worst ever. But it really made me toughen up a lot. When it was finally time for me to be released, I was damn unsure about what was to come for me next, about what I was going to do after that and how I was going to live in the outside world. Because in juvie, there was at least a roof over my head and some food available, but since my mother had already abandoned me, I was already about my survival once I was outside. My nerves lessened somewhat after I found out that my grandfather was the one who was there to pick me up. I hadn't really known the guy beforehand. We only met each other a handful of times, and the man wanted nothing to do with my mother. So it was a surprise that I found out he was willing to take me in, officially. Life with my grandfather was another sort of difficult altogether. He was an ex-military man and lived with a strict discipline, even after retirement, and he expected me to keep up the same. Furthermore, the man was fonder of the tough love rather than the tender one. So even from the get-go, he had already set down new strict rules for me, and I was advised to strictly follow those rules if I wanted to keep living under his roof. It was very hard, but I made it through, eventually. Now at 24, my life had completely taken a turn around from what it once was doomed to be. I was doing very well and even had a complete new look on life. And what's more, I now had a job in town working for the local market. Now the only problem I was facing was the issue of my love life. Or lack of my love life at the moment, to be exact. Not that I wasn't looking forward to changing that, and soon too, if I had anything to say about it, for I had my eye on the new girl, Heather, who had just started working as a cashier about a week ago. She had immediately caught my attention, and I was adamant on making something out of this attraction that I had felt for her. After about a whole ass week of hesitating to ask her out, I had had enough. That's when I finally decided to man up and just out with it, right up front. So I asked her out to the movies that Friday, and she agreed. I couldn't believe that it could be so easy, and then I cursed my old self some for making me wait so long when it was nothing to worry about at all. When I told my grandfather about my date later, he gave a chuckle and patted my back, telling me about how he was feeling that I was starting to become a real man now. As a celebration, as well as a venture out as a real man, he offered to let me use his truck for my date. I don't think that I could have been any happier than that, ever. I was finally going on a date with my crush, Heather, and I was picking that date up in my grandfather's truck. I mean, what more could a 24-year-old man ask for from life? Nothing, that's what. Well, maybe not nothing. Maybe I should have asked for said date to go well too, but oh well. What's done is done and all that. And my date had gone really well initially. We watched the movie, had some popcorn, and did some hand-holding, said some hushed whispers. So, all in all, the date itself went pretty well. I really liked her after getting to know her a bit more, and it seemed that the feeling was mutual. She also liked me. Later on that night, after the movie, I proposed to have dinner together at our local diner. It was actually just my excuse to prolong the date even more. I just wanted to spend more time with Heather, and she said yes. She must have wanted the same thing, so it was all well and good. We went off to the diner and had a little something to eat. It was more talking and less eating, honestly, so we really enjoyed our time. After we finished up our dessert and it was finally time for us to leave, I opened the door for Heather. That was when the shit hit the proverbial fan, because at that precise moment, some other guy had decided to enter the diner, and that's when he bumped into Heather as she was stepping out of the doorway, and he was stepping in at the same time. It gave her a bit of a jostle, and I caught her before she could actually fall down or anything. The older guy, instead of apologizing or quietly leaving, started yelling at her, telling her to move the hell out of the way. He was so obnoxiously rude I couldn't stand it. I wasn't going to let anyone talk to my girl like that, especially when it wasn't even her fault. So I quickly grabbed the guy from his shoulder and took a swing at him, knocking him down on his back. But unfortunately, that was the exact moment 2 officers had stepped out of their cruiser and witnessed the scene when I was punching the guy out, and not anything that had happened before that. The officers immediately came over to me and proceeded to arrest me without giving me even a chance to explain myself. They hurriedly brought me over to their car and unceremoniously shoved me inside. Heather, my newly acquired girlfriend, also tried to reason with the officers and tried to talk them out of arresting me, or at least locking me in the cuffs. They refused to listen on both accounts and took me away from there to a holding cell. The next morning, both my grandfather and my girlfriend Heather bailed me out. I was feeling pretty ashamed and didn't want my grandfather disappointed in me. But the old man surprised me once again. Instead of scolding me for doing something reckless, he placed his arm around my shoulders and told me that it was not my fault, and he didn't hold me responsible for the events. In fact, he said he was actually proud of me for standing up for my lady love and defending her. I felt immeasurably happy and relieved at hearing that. I was content that I was back with the 2 most important people in my life, and that they didn't leave me and were on my side through it all. But that happiness and relief was cut short just a week later. During my hearing in court, the judge saw my criminal record and came to know that I once had a history of violent outbursts of anger. His decision was made the moment he came to know I had already served some time, even if I was just a mere child at the time. So he decided to give me 6 months in jail. My grandfather was angry at that, peeved at the fact that my past of over a decade ago was still defining me today. I mean, just because I once had a criminal offense in my record did not mean that I was suddenly a criminal again. Heather also spoke out in court in my favor, exclaiming how it wasn't right, how I didn't do anything wrong and I was just defending her. "Please, give him a chance," she pleaded with the judge. But all in vain. Their pleas fell onto deaf ears. The judge had given the ruling already, and it was not going to change. With a defeated sigh, I accepted my fate as it was. I knew my past was going to come up once again anyway, but I didn't know it would cause such damaging effects on all our lives. 3 months in, and my grandfather was falling ill. Heather had started looking after him since then, and according to her, my jail time definitely took a toll on him. He was already really old, and this upset was enough to decline his health even further. I was really worried for him, and I vowed to take better care of him once I was out. Just weeks before I was released, though, I got the news that my dear grandfather had passed away, leaving his home and belongings to me. He just didn't give me enough time to take care of him. Finally, after a long wait on my end, my time was up, and I was released from the Justice Center. It all felt like a déjà vu, except this time, there was no grandfather to pick me up. When I walked out, it was already dark, so I didn't waste any time lingering around and just caught a taxicab back to the house, feeling relieved after smelling the fresh air after so long. I stepped into the doorway, and the first thing I saw was the picture frame with grandfather holding me when I was 6 years old, and just so many more lining that wall. I wiped away a stray tear at the memories that came flooding my mind. Just then, the calm was broken by a ring. It was Heather, and she had called to tell me that she was going to be working late and wouldn't be back until morning. I told her not to worry and take her time. As I hung up the phone, I noticed that its battery had dropped really low, so I decided to charge it. But just then, the power cut out. So I decided to leave it at that and first get myself some food that's not from prison, and then get some rest. It was already really late into the night. While all this was happening with Dylan, we have another story running alongside it, all the way back to the other side of town. Earlier in the day, a black van was parked outside the town bank. The security guard of that bank was listening to the radio as they were preparing for the blizzard that was soon coming their way. As the guard approached the door, 5 men with black and white masks stormed into the bank, hitting the guard across the face. The next moment, the bank was filled with shouts.
Everyone, get on the damn floor! And you bitches behind the desk, show me your damn hands, or I'll blow noodles out your dome!
The 5 men loaded all the money bags into the van and headed out of town. But soon, the storm started to hinder their plans. The heavy snow was starting to cover the streets fast. The men decided to get off the main roads. They needed to stop soon if they wanted to make it out of the snowstorm alive. They were already off the main road, and there were not very many possibilities for them out in the unpopulated, wilder areas. They came across a building that looked to be a residential home, so they drove the van off the road and into a ditch and began walking towards the big house out in the field. This house was going to be the place where they were going to stay the night, and if the residents were a nuisance, well, they could always take care of them too. I was laying out in my bed in the upstairs attic after having a hearty meal. Eating a warm, freshly cooked dinner had filled me up like none other. And now the comfort of bed, instead of the cold, thin sheets of jail, felt like heaven on earth. I was finally at home and at ease. I was dozing off a little bit when suddenly I heard something. Someone trying to break into the house through the front door. I quickly sat up and focused, just in case it was the sleep talking. But no, it sounded all too real. Someone, or more than just one someone, was trying to get into my house in the dead of night. That didn't bode well. I reached for my phone and found that there was only one bar for a signal, which was basically as good as nothing. I still tried calling out, but got nothing except the phone dying on me. I knew then and there that I was alone, and nobody was there to help me. And to make matters worse, there were no weapons whatsoever to protect myself either. And Heather was supposed to be home in the morning, so till then, I was all alone. The men had already broken in by then. I could hear them rumble around the first floor, breaking glass and moving furniture across the floor. I had no idea why they were breaking into my house and what they intended to do, but I knew I could not just stay there in the attic waiting for them to be done. I couldn't let them steal or destroy anything in this house. It all linked me to my grandfather, and even if I stayed there, they could still find me. Or worse, they could still be in the house until morning when Heather came by, and I could not let them harm her. So, I snuck downstairs and saw 5 men sitting in the center of the living room. 3 of them were counting a large amount of money on the table. A 4th one loaded his gun, while the 5th one just kept staring out the side window of the room. I was maybe expecting someone trying to steal from me, but definitely wasn't expecting this. They were not some simple criminals, it seemed. I could hear them talking between themselves. They were talking about their next plan of action and their next target and whatnot. The man loading his gun seemed to be their leader. Max, they called him. I slowly and stealthily started creeping down towards the kitchen. They still hadn't noticed me, and I wanted to get my hands on something before facing them. I headed towards the kitchen to get a knife, and after grabbing one just as quietly, I returned to watch them. I even found a baseball bat sitting in the corner. Thankfully, the corner was completely submerged in darkness, so they seemed utterly oblivious to my presence as I crept closer. I was upon one of them when he sensed me and turned over. I didn't give him much time to react and swiftly hit him square in the head with the bat. All of them turned towards me, along with Max as he opened fire. I jumped behind another one of them, using him as a shield, and the bullet hit him right in the forehead, killing him instantly and spattering blood and bits of flesh everywhere. Taking advantage of the shock I caused, I ducked under the table and came out of the other side, jumping on the next nearest man. I rapidly plunged my knife into his back. He started screaming and stumbling, writhing around to make me let go, but I refused until he stopped struggling. By then, everyone had regained their senses. Only 2 men were left. The man with the gun, who had already run out of bullets and was loading again, and then a big guy. Yeah, the giant would be next. I pulled my knife out of the other guy's back, leaving him a screaming and bloodied mess, and charged towards the big man as he stumbled towards the door. I wanted to get to him before he could get out of there. Just as I was about to jump on his back, the ringleader, Max, fired his gun. It hit me in the leg. I stumbled in sudden pain and shock, but I still didn't give up. I reached for the door and swung it open, only to see Heather standing right outside and aiming her shotgun. I quickly ducked down as she fired in rapid succession. She actually shot the big man I was trying to hit first, blowing him back into the wall.
You fool!
Max was next, and then all were either dead or disabled, in no position to attack again. The house looked as if it was painted in red, and the painter had done a terrible job. There were splashes and streaks of blood all over the place. It looked more like an abstract painting, a very horrific and terrifying scene. I forced myself to turn away from them and instead turned towards my girlfriend, who was now inside giving me a checkup and worriedly asking how I was. I had other things on my mind, however, so I bellowed, "How did you know they were here?" Her reply was sure as hell much calmer than I was feeling at the moment. She told me that she heard about the bank robbery before the power went out, and they had said the robbers were last seen traveling the back roads, so she was afraid that if the robbers were really in this area, they might take refuge from the storm. And considering that our house was the only prominent property in the vicinity, their refuge would most likely be our place. She tried to warn me, but my phone was dead, so she decided to ditch work and make sure I was okay. Now, I was floored at her logic and reasoning and touched by her concern for me. I heard the noise from inside when I came over, so instead of rushing in blindly, I tried looking for some way out. Then I remembered that your grandfather always kept his rifle in his truck, so I grabbed it from there. Also, I already called the police. They've got to be on their way. Just as she had finished talking, we could hear the sounds of police cars arriving. There were several of them. They quickly took the robbers, or what was left of them, into custody, thanking us for our help. They told us that the bank was robbed of over $7 million, and those professional thieves traveled all the way from Philadelphia. Later, it was revealed that they had actually been working on banks throughout the southern region and had robbed over 15 banks in total.